Good evening and welcome. On behalf of Miami-Dade College, I'd like to welcome you all to the Mike Fernandez Global Business Series. I am Damian Thorman. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer for Miami-Dade College, and we are really excited to have an extraordinary speaker with you tonight. I want to briefly thank Mike Fernandez, who the namesake of this series. As many of you know, Mr. Fernandez is an extraordinary civic leader and supporter of many philanthropic causes across Miami. We're really lucky to have him in South Florida, both with his business, exemplary leadership in his business, but also his civic engagement in the community. And we're very grateful that that extends to Miami-Dade College. He's been very supportive of the college, and we're very grateful to have this leadership series named after him. I'd like to introduce tonight our featured speaker, Dr. Bernard Meyerson. He is the Chief Innovation Officer for IBM, a pretty big job. Dr. Meyerson is an IBM Fellow. He serves as the IBM's Chief Innovation Officer. He also drives IBM's technical strategy for corporate initiatives within IBM's strategy organization. Dr. Meyerson joined IBM in 1980. He invented silicon germanium technology, which is used as a semiconductor material in integrated circuits. This is the same technology that I understand is used in the Voyager 1 and 2, something we know about in Florida, and we're grateful for that. He founded and led IBM's highly successful analog and mixed signals business. He went on to many senior and executive roles leading global semiconductor development, strategic alliances, systems, and technology group, culminating in his present role in 2010 as Chief Innovation Officer. Now, his team leads the definition and integration of corporate-wide technical and business strategic initiatives. That's a mouthful. We're going to get into what that means, and you're going to have an opportunity to ask questions about his work. He served as chairman of the World Economics Forum's Meta Council Emerging Technologies for the last 2 years. He has received, as you might imagine, an extraordinary number of awards. He just received the Lifetime Achievement Award from SEMI, the 2011 PAIC Award, the 2014 Turning Award, and most recently, Dr. Meyerson was honored with the 2015 National Medal for Public Service within the government of Singapore for his long work and contributions to that government. It is a great honor to introduce Dr. Meyerson. He will give a short presentation, and then we'll sit down and have a conversation for about 20 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to you all for questions. So as you start to, as you listen, you might be thinking about questions you want to ask of Dr. Meyerson. Dr. Meyerson, welcome.
Thank you. First of all, thank you guys for the invite. It's actually a pleasure. As I was explaining, for many years, I led IBM's University Relations program, where this is an incredibly important part of what we do. Like you, I also went to a city university. I went to the City College of the City University in New York. I did my entire studies there, undergraduate, graduate, and PhD. Didn't work badly for me in the end, so there's a proof point there somewhere. What I wanted to do very briefly in this introduction is say, look, people talk about how discontinuities are happening, how business is being driven to extraordinary velocity by modern technology, and they do a lousy job of actually saying what happened. So I figured, let me just give you some examples. Pick the financial sector, but you pick a sector, I'll tell you what hit it. So feel free later, but I figured I'll start with this since it's the focus of the conference I'll be speaking at tomorrow. I worked, as you know, for several years for the World Economic Forum. It was an extraordinary opportunity. If you ever want a real kick, follow what these guys do, because basically they work for the good of the world, period. And that's the thesis. It's run by a guy named, it was founded by Klaus Schwab. And the real pleasure was, they used to have 20 committees that came forward to Davos, the big World Economic Forum meeting each year, with their great ideas about what new technologies were important. The trouble is, each of the 20 committees would bring forward 30 ideas. You had 600 ideas in 3 days to look at them. That worked well. So I was asked, why don't you, herd the cats, if you have to, shoot one or two, and, come up with a top 10 for each year, which I did. All the committee chairmen reported to me, and we then worked out what we thought were the big hits. The reason I start with these is just, if you take a look, a lot of the stuff here relates directly to the businesses that I was worried about in terms of the financial sector. Robotics and avatars, believe it or not, there's a great study that was done. 71% of millennials would rather go to the dentist and have their teeth drilled than go to their bank. That's not a real good thing for the bank. So please, stop sending me human bankers. I'll do with robotics. AI, artificial intelligence, a lot of the stuff, you want the right answer. And the way to get the right answer is something that can crawl through data at a rate you can't imagine. Blockchain, that's something where in terms of just trust, it's an amazing thing, and an AI ecosystem where you actually now allow everybody to work on these technologies openly is an extraordinary thing. These changes are going to change society and change it dramatically in short order. The point is, we looked at what kind of impact all of these things were having if you stayed, again, just in the financial sector. So I focused on the impact of these four: blockchain, robotics, the AI ecosystem, and emergent artificial intelligence in and of itself, and the people who leverage it. Now, I'm not going to be able to crawl through all that. That's about a 2.5-hour talk. But I just want to give you some examples of how the world has changed through what we call the digital disruption, which is heavily enabled by these things I cited. So here's a kicker. The world's largest taxi company owns no vehicles. They don't own one damn vehicle. That's not true. They own like 10 self-driving cars while they're recruiting drivers. This is an interesting thing I won't comment on. You can figure out how that story may end. The world's most popular owner of media doesn't do any content. Facebook. They don't do any of their own content. Not really. You do it for them. Ain't that a gig? The most valuable retailer in the world. Turns out they don't hold any inventory. Ever hear of Alibaba? There you go. The world's largest accommodation provider right now is Airbnb. That doesn't own a damn thing. All of them are huge disruptors. And if you're in the business of finance, the world's largest lender and wealth manager, well, they have, This, by the way, scares the living heck out of most of the people I talk to. It goes downhill from here, so don't worry. So I'm just going to give you just one example of how things move so quickly and how data and all of the things I talked about earlier are coming together to really change the direction of an entire industry. You're probably familiar with Square, right? They've got a little attachment you plug into your cell device, and it makes you an instant point of sale device. But they started there, and that's okay. They were taking payments. But it dawned on them that, wait a minute, if I'm working with a restaurant, a fast food restaurant, let's say, where I take the payments right up front and then I get my food, well, what am I doing? I obviously already took the customer's order to make up the bill, so why don't I just send it to the kitchen? Why would I just have this thing, run around in my terminal? Okay. Well, if I'm sending it to the kitchen, that means I've captured every order in the restaurant, sent every order to the kitchen, but then I know what inventory they need, because by definition, if you've made 62,000 hamburgers, it's probably a bad idea to only 42,000 the next week. This is something that, well, that's interesting. But wait a minute, if you've got all the inventory, all the payments, customer order, all of that, I can do their financing. I can do their accounting. I have all the data already. And then, of course, if I know that they have a cyclical business, I can even start doing lending. So a company that starts off doing payments through the electronic gathering of data and clever use of it ends up doing, your job. It's a very interesting business world where things have changed this dramatically. The only point I wanted to make, and this is where it sort of ends, is data is the new oil. Data is the new oil, right? If you don't refine it, it has no value. Dark data doesn't do anything for you. If you define and refine the data the way that was done by, for instance, Square, it'll run the world. I just wanted to give you a very short snippet. I promised to keep it short, and I did.
Great.
A very short snippet of just why these disruptors are so powerful and the amazing changes they make that scare the heck out of industries. And you only have two choices. You either run or get run over. So it makes for an interesting day. So that's the opening remark.
Great, excellent. Again, welcome. I think that kind of sets up a conversation about the relationship between breakthrough innovation and breakthrough business models. Can you talk a little about those?
You know, a good example, we talked about it earlier. Going back very early in my career, I worked with a bunch of real extraordinary individuals. And we discovered a technology, which you referred to earlier, silicon germanium. Turns out it was not actually useful for what we intended it for. We were going to do computing with that, and it would have worked, but it wasn't going to be a killer. However, we also discovered that there was this interesting business that didn't really exist at the time in any substance. You probably have heard of it. It's called wireless. Yeah. You have to remember how old I am, guys. You guys weren't born when I started in this industry. Most of you, anyway. The bottom line is that breakthrough where we actually took the performance of silicon technology up by almost a factor of 5 to 10x. You've got to keep in mind each generation it's only 20%, so 5 to 10x was unimaginable. It enabled us to actually look at things we never looked at, one of which was high-frequency radios, which actually matter. We flew down to Melbourne, Florida, because I had heard about this company that had something really cute. They had a PC sitting on a desk over here that was playing a CD, and over here, you actually saw the video that was on the CD on another PC, and there was no wire. They were connected wirelessly, and that was like hot stuff back then. It was 802.11b. It ultimately, of course, you hopefully know, that's Wi-Fi, except it was actually done by Harris Semiconductor, and the units cost over $1,000 each. You couldn't give them away. I mean, they were just too expensive. The bottom line was, however, that we said, well, I think I can build that for about $40, because the technology we invented is based on silicon, which cost, believe it or not, about 1/1000th of what they were using. And make a long story short, we actually did it. It worked. And they spun out a company called Intersil, and Wi-Fi began. We were roughly 100% market share, give or take round off error, for the first 10 or 15 years of Wi-Fi. And Intersil was over 80%. It was a revolution, and that's where Wi-Fi came from. So yeah, you know, if you have a technical breakthrough where you get these factors of 5, 10, 100x, it generally speaking opens the door. The trick is you've got to be looking at the right door. A lot of people I know run head-on into doors that were closed and remain closed. This stuff was going to be for mainstream computing. It wasn't appropriate. Now, of course, by the way, it's in every single transistor and every device in your pockets. We did make it appropriate later. But the point of the exercise is sometimes going in a new direction is enabled by these discoveries, and it changes the history of technology.
That's great. So you've been at IBM for forever, I'll leave it at that, a long time. I think many of the students in the audience would be curious about your journey and how you got from an inventor and an entrepreneur to the role that your own personal journey here. And if you could, in the mix there, maybe also mention what is a Chief Innovation Officer?
Chief Innovation Officer is head geek. Boy. Honestly, look, I became an IBM Fellow in 1992. I started off as a bench physicist. My training is in physics. I have zero background in business, despite having now run several multi-billion-dollar businesses. The interesting part of it is the journey is driven by what it is you come up with and what you need to learn to do it. To be very honest, when we came up with silicon germanium, I didn't know anything about negotiating or any of the other skills you actually needed in order to fund this stuff. And since IBM, in its infinite wisdom back then, decided that there was really no future in this stuff called wireless, who would want a wireless device? We actually had to raise our funds ourselves and fund the program. So this is where, one bit of advice is, if you go with a large enough organization, there will be other people with the skills you lack. Be really smart and figure out you're not as good as they are at what they do. And you go and you ask them, hey, could I hang out with you and learn? And the answer was yes. I was very lucky. There was a guy named Jean Gazzelin who had negotiated many of the contracts we had to jointly build semiconductors with a company called Siemens. And I understood that he was actually the best guy at this in the company, which in a company of 400,000 people is pretty high praise. And so I asked him, and he was more than nice. He said, sure, hang out. So I worked with this guy for about a year on and off, learned actually how you get a deal done. And that was the beginning of slowly sort of having two skills. I haven't had the lobotomy yet, in spite of the rumors. I still am fairly deeply technical, but I have run several multi-billion-dollar businesses. And it started with Jean. Similarly, in semiconductors, when we invented silicon germanium, I'm not a double E. I'm not an electrical engineer. I could have built a transistor, but I couldn't build a great transistor that would just blow people away. So I went downstairs and I found 4 engineers who were brilliant. I'd sort of dragged them up to my office, and after about 3 hours of beating on each other, we concluded that there was something there. And they became my good friends, and they still are, by the way, 35 years later. At each stage that I had to move on to the next skill, and this is a valuable thing you gotta follow up on, just align yourselves with people who are good at stuff. I mean, look, the other thing, by the way, is you can't have an immense ego. Now, IBM takes care of that immediately, because I found myself sitting one day in Hursley, England, about to take a team of 4 of my colleagues into a meeting to explain that you can have a purely technical career at the company, because these guys were all deeply technical. And it dawned on me that I was the only guy in the room who did not have a Nobel Prize. That'll pretty much take care of your ego. And so my point is, that is really the journey. I mean, I literally went from a bench scientist to somebody who had to raise funds to fund a program. I had to go find customers. We had to do product development because we didn't have any products. We had technology. We eventually then, I went on to run the semiconductor division, which was an alliance of 8 or 9 large companies. We actually, as an alliance, were larger than Intel by a factor of 2. We weren't a little thing. I mean, we were huge. From there, I ran, Systems Technology Group, all their alliances, which again is about a $40 billion part of the company. And we did some very interesting deals in the meantime. Technologically, you never want to give up your core skill. And one of the interesting things, for instance, is anybody here have an Xbox 360, the previous Xbox? Yeah, don't be embarrassed. I see heads going like this. Yeah. Yeah, blame that one on me. If you go back to 2003 and look up Meyerson and Microsoft, keep in mind, I am the Antichrist at Microsoft. Nonetheless, we formed an alliance, and we did Xbox 360. IBM actually built the core in that system, the entire microprocessor system. And the reason we did it is because we had a security element that nobody in the world had, and it's been astonishingly hard to crack. Sometimes, again, your career just takes these strange turns. In about 7 years ago, I was asked, what do you want to do next? And there was nobody who worked horizontally across all the towers of the company. And that can be the downfall of a company, because if you work in your tower, so you got the software guys here and the hardware guys here, believe it or not, you can actually find that the software doesn't run on our hardware. This is not a good thing. Somebody had to sort of clear the air on that, and one of my odd, strange reputations occasionally I get is I eat children. Not true, but there have been moments you might suspect that from the behavior. The reason for that is when somebody is doing something completely antithetic to our values and what we should be doing, somebody has to speak up. And you only argue based on facts. Data wins. Do not bring, opinions are nice, but then it's not the same kind of thing. But when somebody is just violating the fundamental tenets of the company, whether it's moral, business, whatever, somebody has to call them on it. And so I became part of an organization that did that, and we moved on from there. The key is I've had about 7 to 8 distinct careers. So even though I've been with IBM for 37 years, in that time I would pretty much 8 very distinct different careers. Don't be afraid to move on. It's always interesting. This one is amazing because here we really do whatever we want. We have very high bar we have to clear financially and technically, but we're really on our own. We run now as a series of entrepreneurs in the company. And so it's really evolved enormously from being a bench scientist to a bunch of entrepreneurs who make major bets on new technologies, and our batting average is pretty damn good. So, and you notice, by the way, I always say we and our and team. You notice I never say I. Okay, anybody who sits up here and tells you I and I, by about the third I, just bail out on them because, you know, you wouldn't want to be stuck in a car for 3 hours with this individual, but that's not the real issue. The real issue is if you pulled off stuff like this and you keep saying I, you're missing something. Nobody's that good. I'm sorry, but my experience tells me that the most accomplished people I've ever met are also some of the best team players in the world. And that's another key thing you develop over time is a recognition for just how good your colleagues are. You know, it's really, one of the amazing things about IBM is we actually, long before it was comfortable, back in the days of open software, I don't know if you know the history there, but when Linux started as an open software movement, the famous quote from Microsoft was, "Open source Linux is a cancer." Yeah. Then the lawsuit started, so we actually donated 500 patents to the open source movement to protect them as air cover. We just gave them away. We have no idea what the value of those would be. The point is, even though it competed with us, open source competes. We have AIX, it's a major product. Linux is a direct competitor. It was still better to allow the global community to participate than to try to lock them out. So again, it's about how you view others out there. And views evolved. I mean, at this point, Microsoft got on board, believe me. They have very good management. It's, you know, we're not here to disparage anyone. But it is interesting. You got to keep an open mind. And boy, that was revolutionary back then, to actually protect a bunch of guys who are going to come try to eat your lunch. But you know, it's also a rich source of people you want to hire and bring in. So that's...
So talk a little about, you talked about shadowing and how important that is and has been in your own journey. Can you talk a little about the role of mentors in how that has helped you move through these different positions?
You know, it's funny, it varies. I've been very, very lucky in that I haven't had the traditional relationship you have with a mentor because my stubborn streak is excessive. But what I have had and what I provide is a little bit of mentorship, which I certainly got. I ignored, but I did get it. But more importantly, what I got was 2 things. I got a phenomenal resource. You don't always need a mentor. Mentoring somehow got perverted into, I'll tell you what the future holds. Sometimes you just need somebody you can sit down with and bounce ideas off of. And it is mentoring, but it's a different type of mentoring. It's not about how you can move forward and make more money and get promoted. That's not what it should be about. It's how you do a phenomenal job of what you do, because then no matter who's around, you still will get ahead. And I've been incredibly lucky early in my career, for the first, I would say, 10 years, to have a couple of guys who did 2 things. They were great sounding boards. I mean, I could go ask them questions, and if they didn't know the answer, they knew somebody who did. And they provided executive air cover, which was incredibly important. During the time we were developing the silicon germanium program, it threatened the existence of the very heart of our semiconductor group. And there were executives who took great umbrage at this. And I had a mentor who was a very highly ranked individual, and he said, "Look, what can I do to help?" And I said, "It's really easy. Every time they come at me with a baseball bat, I'm going to refer them to you, and I'm just going to ignore them. So, you know, just brace yourself." He thought I was kidding. I actually wasn't. He came back about a year later with, you know, blood coming from his ears, saying that wasn't fun. But the truth is, in the end, of course, we made many, 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 many billions of dollars from this hated program. So again, mentors can be a lot more than just, here's some career advice. A really great mentor can be your resource, and you shouldn't be hesitant to use them. They'd be delighted. And my job, I actually have a presentation on, you know, how you keep innovation going in a big company. And one of the things I say is you have to provide executive air cover. That is a key part of what now has become a sort of non-traditional version of mentoring.
So let me move into that. I had that question for you, which a little later, but let's move right to it. What is, how do you in a large institution, I think in government, in academia, large institutions like IBM and other companies, right now the whole idea and this notion of innovation is hot. But how do you make it real inside an institution that is really rooted in those, entrenched in the status quo? You're everything but status quo.
Well, look, first of all, you have to have a culture that supports it. I mean, one of the really remarkable things about IBM, again, is if you take a look at what we do now and you take a look 10 years ago, you wouldn't even recognize the place. I mean, cloud 10 years ago didn't exist. It's now a huge chunk of our business. Similarly, cognitive. We went from essentially nothing 15 years ago to being dominant in terms of developing Watson AI. And those come out of a very interesting culture, and it goes way, way back. We've had a research division that is enormous going back, good Lord, 50 years, 70 years, long, long time. It used to be started at Columbia University, I think back in the 40s. And what happened is it became part of our culture, and it sort of saved us. We are pretty much it. There aren't a whole lot of companies, which is to say none, that have a foundational research program of the scale and magnitude we have around the globe. It's almost unreal if you saw the size of it. And what we do, for instance, is every year we do a Global Technology Outlook, which is a ground-up program. We literally come ground up with what is the next big thing and what the heck should we be investing in. And every year our chairman and I would say the 30 top leaders of the company spend an entire day, we're talking 12 hours, face-to-face with the output of that team called the Global Technology Outlook. It's a remarkable thing because that roll-up also gets people going in terms of, look, we can't miss this. And some of the stuff they've come up with is just astonishing. Neuromorphic computing, I mean, these are things you barely hear about. And that's one of the mechanisms. The other problem is, at the other end of the spectrum, you have the problem of reduction to practice. So the innovation stuff at the front end doesn't count because that's sort of invention. Getting it actually into the field has been a challenge at times. And we've had to create a variety of means to facilitate that. One of them that I actually enjoyed is I got the technical community together, the top 100 leaders, about 6 years ago, and I asked them what made them crazy. Pick one thing that really aggravates you about IBM. And they said, look, we have all this great technology, but if I want to go out and do a job with a company where I think I can do a joint venture with a company, a proof of concept that would blow their socks off, it takes me 3 to 6 months to get the staffing and the funding and the signatures. And 3 to 6 months from now, 2 startups and a goat could have finished this job. Okay. So what happened is I started a program. I said, all right, 48 hours, we'll get you staffing, funding, and launched if it meets some criteria for. And the joke is, it turns out we're now on our 70th project that we've launched in a 48-hour window, which back then was unthinkable. But again, you have to keep doing stuff like that. It's you're going to love this. This is a Bernieism. In IBM, we love acronyms. Everything's got an acronym. Unfortunately, we reuse the acronyms, so we have acronyms for acronyms. And it makes me crazy. So somewhere as this thing became successful, and we're talking ROIs between 100 and 1,000x, depending upon, 100 is the bottom, by the way. I have a staff of entrepreneurs. We invest in people. They come forward, they say, we should do X. We invested it. I give you, one was just in Ginny actually just talked about it in today's results. The Postal Savings Bank in China did a blockchain proof of concept. That was my team that ran that. 48 hours. The guys from China came in and said, hey, what could we do in China? We said, I think this would be a great demo of secure and trusted computing. And they went and signed up, and lo and behold, it all worked. The point is we had to name the program, and it was hilarious because I just couldn't bring myself to come up with another acronym. So we have now the standing joke in IBM, which is if you come up, they say, what's the name of the program? I say, the program's name is SPEED. I said, really, what does it stand for? I said, get a damn dictionary. That's pretty much it, very simple, speed. It matters. The 48 hours is not a joke. We actually do meet that criteria every time. And we've run about 70 of these projects. We're about 95% technically successful, which is extraordinary. But you have to meet the crowd that works for me to understand these. I hand-selected the 15 people out of 400,000. You probably get good people that way. The other thing is, it basically, the business side has been equally successful. It's about 65% of these proof of concepts we run result in significant business. I mean, really very significant business, which is unheard of in the investment community. I've been part of venture capital. Nobody gets those numbers. We have a bit of a cheat, which is we're starting with good stuff to begin with. You know, these aren't startups. These are things that are just about ready to go to market, like blockchain. They're not there yet, but they're very close, and you can get them out the door.
You talked about data and culture. Are there other enabling elements to an innovative culture, innovative ecosystem, I should say?
The only thing that matters is people. I'm going to be honest, and I'll regret doing this, but I'm going to do it anyway. I once made up a chart, and I said, you know, if you ask me what it takes to do innovation, I'll give you the top 10 items. People. People, 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 people. You know, it's kind of like buying real estate. Location, location, location. Top 10 items is people. Believe it or not, after that, I got 3 nasty remarks. This guy never explained what items 2 to 10 were. You can't win. But in any case, the bottom line is we also hire a specific type of person. It used to be that in businesses like ours, you love to hire people who are deep. You know, they're wonderfully deep. Yeah, they lived at the bottom of a 30-foot hole, 3 inches across. When they're really deep, the only trouble is they can't explain what they do to another human being who doesn't have at least 2 PhDs in their space, which makes them essentially useless. They're really deep, but they're useless. You actually want people who can explain special relativity to their mother. And that, you know, by the way, I failed miserably, but I did try being a fool. The point is, by the way, special relativity, you actually can explain that. I'm a physicist, I apologize. But the point of the exercise is you want people who have the ability to team, who are multifaceted, who actually enjoy working with other humans. It really changed the face of the company because there was a time that we really did live in these very narrow pockets. And you're not that effective. You'll find that you are absolutely unbeatable when you integrate across all your assets. And so you need people who will work in that mode. And there are a lot of people who won't. There are numerous people who just can't somehow see their way to work with somebody else because, of course, they're a lesser human being, which pretty much tells you what the problem is with them.
So not too long ago, the average Fortune 500 company lifespan was about 75 years. You're over 100. Not you personally, of course. But today it's around 20. It's actually less than 20, and the estimates are it's heading toward 5.
Yep.
So you've been at IBM for 37 years. Talk a little about, you had, IBM had a near-death experience in the late 80s, 90s. Can you talk about how you responded, how IBM avoided many of what happened to many other companies, which is the death experience? You were able to transform and become over $100 billion, 400,000 employees, very successful. How did that transformation happen?
You know, we historically make what we call big bets. The transformation required us to make yet another big bet. And they are scary things. What most people don't know is back in the late, as we came up near the 60s, when we were coming out with System 360, which really was the first big commercial, you know, mainframe, which just revolutionized computing because you ran high-level language like Fortran. I mean, this was a whole new world. In order to generate that, believe it or not, we invested the entire revenue of the company in that one project. You want to talk about a big bet, right? In other words, if you got $5 billion in revenue, you spend $5 billion revenue, not profit, revenue on this. That means that if it works, you're a hero, and if it doesn't work, you die. There is a time to make big bets. And that big bet grew IBM to be what it was. It was a powerhouse for 30, 35 years. You could write your own ticket. Unfortunately, if you slow down or you get comfortable, you get run over. And we came very close to getting run over. That was a number of different factors, not entirely was us. You know, the joke is we, of course, as you know, became dominant in laptops, PCs. I mean, that was the IBM PC was revolutionary, the ThinkPads. The problem with that was that all kinds of hype developed around it we never even anticipated, which we should have, which was the world's going to be run from a bunch of ThinkPads. Yeah, you betcha. Unfortunately, when that gets going and it becomes the hype, what happens is everybody decides, well, we don't have to buy anything. We're just going to buy a bunch of laptops and run our bank. Yeah, you bet. That worked well. But the trouble is it can take 2 years to figure that out. And in the meantime, the company suffers terribly. If you aren't proactive in looking at the direction the company is going and taking those assets that aren't working and disposing of them, instead of having fewer jobs, there will be no jobs. You will cease to exist. And it's very hard in a company like ours that had a 30, 40-year run of just unbelievable and uninterrupted growth to admit that the world had turned and we had to go do something about it. We had to bring in somebody from outside the company, Lou Gerstner, who used to refer to himself as the cookie man. Don't ever take that seriously. Lou is brilliant. He is one of my heroes. And he came in and recognized that, guys, I don't know how to tell you this, but we had staffed to address being a $150 billion company, $100 billion company, at a time when we weren't growing at all. We had plateaued, and what happens is you run out of money, little detail there. And so we had to go through eliminating a lot of the baggage we had built, and we had lots of surplus. And what was amazing is within a year or two of the draconian seeming reductions that he drove, as you would expect, profit went up. Well, that's not a surprise, but what was fascinating is revenue went up. Now think about that for a minute. You get rid of a ton of what you've got and the revenue increases. That's worrisome. That means the people were getting tripping over one another and getting in the way. It's a very hard admission to make. And what happened is, though, IBM has constantly reinvented itself, and we continue to do so today, but we've learned a painful lesson from that era, which is we were way too late in taking those actions. So, for instance, people say, you got rid of the PC division. Why? The answer is it's a commodity. It has commoditized, and if we're going to do high value add things, having a research division that's global working on the leading edge of quantum computing probably is not commensurate with making 2 cents on the dollar on a laptop. It just doesn't make sense. Similarly, we got rid of our low-end x86 servers. Each of those changes is really a nail biter. It's very hard to get out of a business. Most businesses fail, in my opinion, because they can't admit it failed. The poor thing is lying there. It hasn't taken a breath in 3 hours, and it's blue. It's probably not a good bet resuscitating is going to work. And yet, they have a problem admitting that, and that can lead to fiasco. So it's a very tough thing to do.
So let's start to take some questions from the audience. For our students, if they want to work at IBM, what kind of education sets should they be thinking about?
A large part of it is learning that you don't stop learning. One of the things, the world is just moving so quickly that you arrive with the skill set. Take my word, the skill set I have today barely resembles. I still think I can integrate, but we'll stop there. I can't do spherical Bessel functions anymore. You have to be willing to come in and continue to learn. The hot sectors, obviously, are things like AI and machine learning and cyber defense, that sort of, they're all, there's no secret. You can actually look what's going on out there. But IT, information technology, the handling of big data, analytics, these are all critical elements in modern society.
That's great. Okay. Please.
Hi, my name is Ebony. I'm hoping this is a softball question for you, so please get ready to answer this softly. I just want to know, you're the Chief Innovation Officer at IBM. What is one innovation you've seen over in your past years of experience that has really surprised you, come out of left field for you?
That's an interesting question. What innovation has come completely out of left field and just kind of blown me away? Actually, I'll be honest. Those of you who are familiar with Watson and winning the game Jeopardy, that came out of a bar. Yeah, I'm serious. The guy who ran software, Charles Lickel, a friend of mine, was in a bar, and all of a sudden it went silent. And he looked around because that's never a good thing. The TV was playing, and everybody's staring at it silently, which is many times horrible. So he goes running out to see what it is, but it turns out it was just Ken Jenner was playing his 80th consecutive game of Jeopardy, which he had won. Okay. And he looked at this, and he remembered there was this guy named Dave Ferrucci back at Research who was playing with a question and answer system. And he calls Dave up. He says, hey, Dave, do you think we could ever play Jeopardy? At that point, we got 10% of the questions right after 3 hours. And Dave said, sure. Now, given that state of the art at that time, if you had asked me back then, was there any chance of ever playing it competitively, much less winning it, my answer would have been, you're kidding, right? It turns out, of course, we won, decidedly. That whole incredible acceleration really took me by surprise. I mean, I knew AI, people have been working on that, you got to understand, since the 50s. And all it produced was bad movies. So that one really just came out of left field. The other one is not IBM, but when I chaired the committee on Meta Council on Emerging Technologies, CRISPR-Cas. Anybody here know what CRISPR is? C-R-I-S-P-R? Okay. You've all heard of genetic engineering? Yeah. There's no such thing. It's called the genetic crapshoot. What you do is you take a virus, you put a snippet of genetic material in the virus that you hope to get somewheres into something else, and it inserts itself somewheres in the DNA, not necessarily at any point. You're not engineering, you're hoping it gets someplace useful and does something useful. CRISPR isn't that. CRISPR is the first true genetic engineering capability where it literally enables you to edit precisely DNA. You can literally snip out a piece you don't want and put in a piece you do want at a known location in a chain, which is extraordinary. That shocked, I mean, that ability, again, out of left field. The woman who developed it is incredibly ethical, in fact, and we spoke at length with her because think how dangerous that is, right? Would you all like 7'2", all-muscle, blue-eyed basketball players? We can make one of those. You may not want to. But the other side of the coin is people who die of horrible diseases like Huntington's and such, where it's genetically passed, you could actually snip out the gene once you have it identified, and it would never happen. Again, an astonishing thing. So it's a long list. If you're not amazed by what goes on in the world today, you ain't paying attention. But yes, there are a whole list of those that absolutely astound me.
Thank you.
My name is Alistair Villa, and my question is around the impact of automation and artificial intelligence. As you know, there's a lot of talk about the impact on jobs and how jobs are going to look like in the future. I wonder for our students here who are preparing for those jobs, what would be your recommendation in terms of what they can do, focus on, if anything, to be ready for those jobs? And I guess what will be required of them, do you think?
I work for the World Economic Forum out of that very concern because the nature of employment is going to change as automation and AI takes hold. However, Ginny said it best. What you're going to have is, instead of the traditional blue-collar jobs, because they will, over time, vanish. The fact is, Uber is self-driving cars. Well, there's an interesting thing. However, the way she defined it, which was actually a good way to explain it, is there will be new-collar jobs. The fact is, AI is an assistive technology. When it comes to things, humans bring judgment. They color situations, common sense. That we've never even come close in a machine setting. But you need to be comfortable working with these very, very powerful assistive technologies. They have huge value to add, but you have to be willing to work with them. They're not a competitor. They're a facilitator. If you look at a doctor trying to diagnose a rare cancer that has a genetic cause that may only have been discovered 2 weeks earlier, a typical physician only reads 5 papers a month out of tens of thousands. Watson can read, well, any number. Just keep feeding it. The point is, it doesn't replace the physician, but it can say, hey, I think it's this genetic abnormality shown by this 22-year-old woman who's Asian and never smoked and who has a lung cancer that's inexplicable at her age. And it turns out that there's a paper out there from just weeks earlier explaining that, yeah, it's due to this. And by the way, we know how to treat cancers where that abnormality is there. Here's the recommended treatment with a 95% success rate. Those, by the way, it's a real example I just gave you. My point is, the physician wasn't upset at that. The physician was, hot damn. I don't read 10,000 papers a month. But it's a different way of working. And so you have to be adaptive. But it's not that everything goes away. We're not even remotely near that sort of situation. But yes, the nature of employment will become much more dynamic, whether we like it or not. And the good news is there's a whole lot of stuff that will come out of it, frankly, that just opens up different opportunities. If you look at the history of these kinds of industrial revolutions, curiously, they've actually, in the end, net created wealth and jobs. So, there are alarmists, I'll be honest, and there are manual labor tasks that are going to vanish, and that is a very big disruption which society is going to have to somehow deal with. That's a much longer conversation.
Adaptation. Thank you, sir.
I think we have time for one more.
Thank you very much for coming to Miami-Dade. And my question, although it's a short one, it's a very hard one. How did you decide which risks were worth taking? For example, how did you decide, oh, we're going to spend all this money on this when obviously it's not just data analysis, it's not just, you might say, heuristic decision making. So how would people, I would say, in particular students here, if they could learn one thing, I would tell them is learn how to appreciate risk and basically be comfortable with it. So in your 37 years at IBM, you've had to do that a lot.
Two things you have to keep in mind. First of all, data wins. In other words, even if you take a risk and you go down a path, if the data says your idea was stupid, you know what? Bag it. Hard lesson, but I have a long list of projects that I started and I killed because they weren't working. The other side of the coin, though, is go big if it looks like it's big. And, again, it's got to be data wins. It can't be. In other words, as your thing progresses, at every point, you need to have some sort of metric. The last one is very important, which is innovate. You have to do innovations that matter. People fall in love with things that if it's successful, nobody cares. Not a good thing. There's probably not a business there. The idea that we could make connectivity pervasive in the world at almost no cost, yeah, that was probably something they were going to care about. So we went big on that, silicon germanium and the related Wi-Fi work. We went huge. It's simply a matter of being a realist. I mean, it's not as complicated as it sounds. It really isn't. Usually, you can see when the smoke is pouring off the apparatus and the fire trucks are on the way to put out your latest creation, it's probably not doing well, and you should move on. And you'd be astounded how many people get crappy results and position them as the gift. I'll get it right sometime. The standard joke is there's a time constant in their work. It's always 20 years from the date they talk till they'll be done. There's a warning in that. So it's not as rocket science as it sounds. It's okay to take risk, but know when to call it quits as well. If you just do A and not B, you won't last long. Yeah.
So let's take, we'll if you can answer or ask your two questions, and then we'll have Dr. Meyerson answer, and then we have to end.
Very nice to meet you, and thank you very much for answering this question. My name is Harold Gill. And together with my professor, we always talk about mentorship, and the words that you expressed maybe touch me and touch a lot of people of my generation and age, because we don't have much resources when it comes about mentorship or where to go when we have goals. Because I myself always think about long-term goals and short-term goals, and I'm pretty sure that right now you're living your long-term goals. But I'm also very sure that you had a lot of short-term goals that you achieved for them. So my question to you is, other than resources and the wonderful words that you gave us when you spoke about resources, where can we look up for, or what type of mentorship would you tell a person that's 23 years old to, look out for the best future that he can maybe brought himself?
Thank you. We're going to take the second question and then have Dr. Meyerson answer.
Dr. Meyerson, you briefly discussed blockchain technology as a major disruptor to the financial industry. How can blockchain be used to establish trust in transactional relationships?
Okay. Well, let me do the mentorship one first. The mentor, I'm going to be honest, you have to look, in any organization you join, you will be able to spot within your first several months people who are curiously not popular in the sense of, just everybody loves them, but rather curiously, people flock to this person. That's where you want to look for mentorship, because they may not be necessarily the highest ranking individual there, but they're a resource. And that resource is precious. They seem to know more about the answers and what they need to do than anybody else there. You want to basically use them as your first point of contact. It becomes self-evident. So whatever organization you join, just get a sense of who really is. If you draw one of these Venn diagrams where all the overlaps are in the middle around this person, is your best indicator that this person is not just a resource, but is willing to act as a resource. Even if they can't take you on as a full-time mentor, they will actually be of great value. That's the quickest way of identifying them. As far as blockchain, bottom line, the way blockchain works in this is going to be the really abbreviated version, everybody has a single hyperledger. There is a single ledger for every transaction. The way it works is, let's say there are 15 people on this chain, 15 banks. All 15 banks get a copy of every transaction that occurs. Why is that important? And by the way, they can only see the ones they're entitled to see because all of blockchain is encrypted. So you only give the decryption keys to the bank for those things in the record that they're entitled to see. The rest of it is just gibberish. The key is this. Insider trading, insider bad actors, they always try to cover their tracks by altering the books of that institution. However, blockchain is a sequential deposit of actions, literally one after the other into a ledger. There are 15 people who hold the ledger. The person who's committing a bad act within a company can only alter the local ledger. And the second they do that, all 14 start screaming foul because, what did you do, right? I got 14 identical ledgers and yours is corrupted. Let's go see why. And you get caught. It's really an ingenious thing. It is not Bitcoin. Lord forbid. That's a whole different way of just sneaking money out of the country without telling anyone. But in all seriousness, now what I did was I actually described a slightly older version. There's a vastly more sophisticated version of blockchain. And by the way, we do open blockchain. It's called Open Hyperledger. Same deal as Open Linux. The point is, it is a very highly trusted way of sharing data because it involves the safety of multiple copies of what should be the identical ledger. So the cheater is stuck because they may be able to hack into one place. They can't get all 75. And that's really the key. It makes it incredibly difficult to you'd have to simultaneously hack all 75 that are in different locations, secured by different means. Good luck with that. And so it's a very clever system, I must say. And by the way, I just got back from Dubai, where the Dubai itself is going to put the entire record of all citizens in all ways up on a single instance of blockchain for that reason. So you have a single trusted ledger of who's who doing what. Because it used to be they had many different government agencies, and if you tried to compare what data they had on each agency for each person, they didn't match, which isn't a surprise. You know, some are backdated, whatever. This way you have a single trusted ledger. So I have to stop there, but thank you very much for coming, guys.
Thank you, Dr. Meyerson. Please, thank you again for coming, for sharing your wisdom and insight. We really greatly appreciate it. Thank you.